and welcome to the podcast. I can totally do that. I am Elena Skinner, your host. This is the podcast where we explore careers and opportunities for people with disabilities from the perspective of people with disabilities. Today, I would like to introduce to you Eric Simie, and he is retired as an academic advisor from a local community college. Hello, Eric.
Hey.
Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am soon to be 59 years old. I retired from working about 4 years ago and live in Rochester, Minnesota. I was born with cerebral palsy, and they tell me I have a unique case because my disability mostly affects the muscles on my right side, so my right hand, my right leg, and supposedly my left side has normal function. So, and they say very few people are affected in that way by CP.
That's very interesting. I've never heard of anything quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you percentages, or I won't be comfortable giving you percentages because I haven't really researched it, but the medical people I work with say that it usually, if your body is divided in half, it usually is at the waist. It usually affects both legs or both arms rather than dividing you in half the wrong way. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your experiences. How did you get interested in your career choice?
Kind of by accident, to be honest with you. If I had to do it over again, I would advise people to do a lot more research. I was very, very lucky, very grateful, very blessed to be surrounded by people who helped kind of guide me. I went to Augsburg College in Minneapolis, and one of the reasons I picked that school was, at that time, it was one of the few completely accessible campuses. All the buildings were connected by skyways or tunnels, and so it was a small campus, and I never had to go outside to go to class. If I wanted to stay inside, I could. And when I went there, I thought I was going to go into sports psychology. Big sports fan. My family's involved with sports. I grew up watching and being involved in many ways, but since I couldn't play, I like to be involved in the coaching and the planning and that kind of stuff. So I majored in psychology with minors in special ed and social work when I was in college, but I planned to go to Bowling Green University and get my master's in sports psychology. I had been accepted, everything was ready to go. Then my mother got cancer, and so I wanted to be closer to home. I'm the oldest of three, and just wanted to be around my family a little bit closer. And when I was in college, I had a work-study job in Augsburg's program for students with disabilities. And I was a tutor in that program, and kind of a pseudo-mentor, I guess, as time went on. In my senior year, I was the head tutor coordinator, and I was very lucky that some professional people on the campus saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And from that student position, when I decided to stay closer to home rather than go to grad school right away, I was offered a position as an academic advisor at Augsburg, and that's where all this stuff started. So
that's awesome in the way that people were able to kind of see stuff in yourself that you weren't quite ready to see. Yeah. And that's awesome that Oxford had a academic advising or at least advising for people with disabilities.
They were really, now again, I started college at Oxford in 1984, so I mean that's 40 years ago now, and Augsburg was one of the leading programs in the country. They're affiliated with the Lutheran Church of America, and the Lutheran Church picked out Augsburg as their campus that they really kind of, at that point, funneled people to with disabilities, and they made sure that they had a concerted effort to make the campus physically accessible, and then from that grew the program for students with learning disabilities, and it was one of the first in the country and really nationally known. And so I didn't know about the program when I first went there. I got involved with it because friends of mine were involved with it as mentors and tutors. So I was very blessed because my mentors found me. I didn't think I necessarily was mature enough to seek them out. They found me. Augsburg was and is a blessing to me for what they saw in me that I didn't see in myself.
That's incredible in the fact that, you know, the way the school chose to, you know, be a source of light for people with disabilities. And yes. I'm so glad that you know, were able and invited to be a part of that, because you know, from what I'm guessing, that kind of trickles over to your career choice. So my next question for you, and you kind of answered this, was how did you get interested in your career choice?
Well, part of me always kind of wanted to be a teacher. I think that was my first career choice in junior high school. My mother was a third grade teacher who chose to be a stay-at-home mom after the kids were born, and she would substitute teach, more committed, stay home with us. I have teachers in my family, my godparents and on both sides. But anyway, education was a way of life. And my dad was a Lutheran minister, so I think that had something to do with me wanting to serve people and do that kind of stuff. But I was always afraid, because of my physical disability, would I be able to manage a classroom? You know, whether I would be able to deal with discipline and physically get around the classroom and that kind of stuff. So from that, then I kind of went into guidance counseling and that kind of stuff, figuring that was more one-on-one and maybe a little bit less intimidating for me than being in a classroom of 20 or 30 students, and so that's where my disability probably influenced my career choice. I thought a lot about my love really is sports. And I thought I had done some writing for my hometown newspaper covering sports, but I was concerned that if as I grew in that profession, I didn't know if I'd be able to physically handle all the traveling and at that point, all the typewriting and that kind of stuff that would be involved in writing columns for newspapers. So I kind of shied away from that too. So, but this really influenced me positively and negatively, I guess, in my career choice.
Yeah, I think the way that you chose to kind of think through the different paths is, you know, super inventive of you, because I think we often think that, like, you know, that once we get into it, it will be easier, and maybe in some cases it will, but I applaud you for your ability to kind of think ahead. And honestly, I think what you've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you found the core of what you wanted. The core wasn't necessarily a classroom. The core was teaching and sharing knowledge.
Well, thank you for the compliment for one. But I also want to make sure that people know that there are a lot of other people that influence me that I benefit from. I think I really benefited from growing up in a series of small towns. My dad was a Lutheran minister, a pastor, so we moved every 5 years or so. That was just the way that the church did things. And so, but I always lived in a small town. And I never lived in a town bigger than 2,000 people until I went to college. And I think, in a way, that benefited me a lot. For one, it helped me see that the world doesn't just revolve around one little small town. It gave me a broader perspective, but I also think it helped me relative to my disability, because when you're in a small town, people know all of you, right? I wasn't just the kid in 3-hour math that was handicapped or crippled or whatever word you want to use. They knew me because they saw me in town, and I was in their Sunday school classes and their other general activities. So they got to see the whole person, and I think that helped with me being accepted in the community, and for me, for my disability just to be part of me instead of my whole definition of who I was. And because I was a small town, I think that also helped people assimilate me and accommodate the things I need, and just see that it all part of me. I really was blessed that way. I'm a pretty lucky guy. I think that graduating from a school of 45 kids in my class, right? That I should say my grade, not my class. They all, because they all knew me, and they knew all of me, that it was just kind of normal to have me around and adapt things. I also think that I really was blessed to be born when I was, because I was like the first generation of people that went through school K through 12 during all the legislation that required schools to accommodate people with disabilities. Public Law 94-142 came into legal existence, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. So programs and that mindset always starting to be the unintended pioneer for some of these really small schools. I was the only person like me in my school, every school I went to. So I got to, how do I say it, be the one that the school district could experiment with. And because my mom had an education background, I think that helped them kind of navigate the system. So there were a lot of things that fell in place for me that had nothing to do with anything that I did. And, a lot of my teachers in elementary school and high school went to my dad's church, so they, I don't know, saying about it, saying that says it takes a village to raise a child. I think that is very true in my case. I come from good stock, and I really thank my mom and dad and my grandparents and all that kind of stuff. But I also am very thankful that I grew up in Hudson, Iowa, and Lake Mills, Iowa, and Cleveland, Minnesota, and Felt, Minnesota, these little small towns that could all kind of nurture me as I went.
That's awesome in the fact that you've understood the small town impact on your life. And I've totally been there, where I've kind of been the experiment in school where they'll bring a new thing to try, whether it's a piece of technology, and they'll be like, hey, will you try this? Does it work? And I don't know about you, but I kind of loved that. How did you kind of feel about being the quote-unquote experience?
But it was both. It was both, because I like that people are investing enough in me that they're willing to try things. They always had to adapt things for me and Fayed. And I was really lucky because I had the spectrum of accommodations. I had one Fayed teacher that just involved me in everything. You're in there. You play with everybody. You do everything. Now I had another one that was very concerned that, don't get hurt and don't blah, blah, blah. And I realized that even though they addressed it completely oppositely, I don't know if that's a word, but anyway, they did it completely differently, that they each had totally my best well-being in mind. And so I think without me consciously being aware of it, that helped me realize that there isn't one way to accommodate, right? And it kind of opened up my mind, again, unconsciously, but so that later on in my professional life, when I was the one that was trying to figure out accommodations, that I could open my mind a little bit on there's no one way, one right way to accommodate things. It can be inclusive or it can be different. It can be, there's no like cookbook for the way that you had to do it. So, yeah.
I love that. I think that's super impactful because, you know, that never occurs to me because I've also had two sides of the spectrum. One person is totally like, yes, let's get in there, let's do all the things. And then one who's a little bit more hesitant. And so I appreciate your open-mindedness about, you know, understanding the different impacts and the same goals that they're trying to help you to accomplish.
And sometimes at different stages of life too. I mean, when you're 5 and 6 and 8 and 10, it's a little bit easier to include them because there isn't the physical differences that once you got into junior high school, some guys are 14 are 6'2" and 180 pounds, and some are 5'3" and 110. So, accommodation had to also take into consideration the environment that we were in too. So.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I don't think a lot of people think about, and I think that's a great thing to bring up. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your, education experience. If you, so going back to your career choice, when did you realize, the moment of, I can totally do that?
I don't know if it was a moment. I think people realized it for me more quickly than I realized it for myself. When I started working for Augsburg as a student, it was a work study job. And I just tutored psychology because that was my major, that's what I did. And it was the professionals in there that said, Eric, you're good at this, or you're good enough that we want to make you the head student tutor. And so it helped me. I was cocky enough, I guess, to think I could be good at whatever I wanted to be good at if I just worked hard enough. But it was a validation from other people that helped me see it. And then as I got into the Augsburg thing, it was kind of encompassed by that or exposed to that. I started to realize that I was working in a program that was nationally known. I mean, people from all over the country were coming in to see, how Augsburg did things. And when you're in something, you don't realize how big it is until, at least I didn't, until other people people were flying in from Chicago and Detroit, everywhere. Well, how do you do this? What are your best practices so that we can copy them? I thought, well, it just is natural to me. And so I was, again, my circumstances, my environment really helped me be bigger than I thought it was.
That's, sometimes life gives you right time, right place, and it sounds like you truly you know, whether you knew it or not, truly chose to take that on, because I think there would be many people in your situation that would not choose to, and you don't know where you're gonna end up if you choose the other side.
And but I guess that's the point I want to make too, is that that's true for everybody, whether they have a disability or not. I mean, we have different adjectives in our life, but the fact that mentor helped me, or that I was lucky to be invited, that's true for everybody. Whether you have two good legs or two good eyes or whatever it is, if you don't seek out your environment or take advantage of your environment, you're missing an opportunity, I think.
That's a very good point. So, why do you feel it's important to have people with disabilities in your career?
Okay, I'm going to come across like a hypocrite.
No worries.
When I say this, because I did it both ways, right? The first part of my career was I was an advocate for people with disabilities, and I'm sure that my having a disability helped me with that, because the people I worked with, the students I worked with, or the people I was trying to change their mindset, I think they knew that I knew what I was talking about without me having to prove it. By the fact that I lived it, I think helped me advise my students, because we automatically had a bond because they knew that I knew their struggle. And I think it helped me get credibility with administration, where I talked about how we need to set up this room for accessibility or whatever. So my disability helped me get my job. I need to be honest about that. But I don't think I had to have a disability to do my job well. And part of it for me was, by halfway through my career, I needed to prove to myself, even though I had gotten these national awards and been put on, sounds so arrogant, but put on a pedestal for how good I did my job within the disability community, I needed to prove to myself that I was good at my job regardless, and that I was more than just a poster boy for disability services. And so the second half of my job, in my career, I did a job that wasn't affiliated with disabilities. And I think that might have been more for my own fulfillment than anything else. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I could be a good advisor, I could be empathetic, I could be a program developer, regardless of whether I was working with people that walked and talked like me or not. So I think it's important that people with disabilities are in any kind of job, only because, not only because, but because that's reflective of the world that we live in. You know, a person with disabilities should be on TV. They should be in the bank. They should be pumping your gas, whatever it is, because that's the world that we live in. And as long as we give people the opportunity to explore whatever career they want to, I think it benefits society to see a variety of people doing every job. So again, that's what I mean about being a hypocrite, because I started my career within my disability community, and I'd be lying if I didn't admit that my disability helped me get that started. But I think it's important. Um, I had a classmate at Augsburg that was born without legs, and he wrestled on the college wrestling team, played football without legs, and worked at ESPN. But to me, there was nothing big about that, because he still had to be able to do his stories, and he still had to have a camera presence and that kind of stuff. So it's more about having an opportunity to meet the standards rather than be given the opportunity to meet the standards. If I don't know if that makes people.
No,
I'm sure there are people in the community that would take issue with my perspective on that, and you should. No one perspective is always right, but that.
I love your perspective. I think, for you to realize that, yes, you got a job originally because you had a disability, but then also sometimes you just need to do things to prove to yourself, like you said, and I think that's super important, and sometimes that can be overlooked because, sometimes I feel like people with disabilities are constantly trying to prove to society, and so I'm so glad that you are able to say, it was finally time for me to prove to myself that I could be an effective advisor. And I think for you to have that insight does make you an effective advisor, does make you a person that understands both ways of the world.
And I want to pick up on something that you just said about having to prove to society that we can do it. I think that was now, after having not worked now for a while, kind of looking back on my career, that is. I mean, I'm proud of my work ethic and proud of what I did and whatever, but I also think that it's never just either or. It's a little bit about it was my blessing, but it was also my curse. That I was so driven that I was going to be good at what I did and prove people I could do this and whatever it is, that sometimes I let that get in my way. My biggest regret now is that I didn't make more use of accommodations. I was so driven to prove to the world that I could do this that sometimes I let that drive get in the way of me being more efficient at my job. Or, I work late just because I wanted to prove to people I could do it. Or I held myself to higher standards almost because I felt like I had to be able to prove that I belonged. And I probably would have had a healthier work life if I would have really dived into accommodations and learned how to use technology and learned how to let them give me sticky keys or, now again, technology now isn't what it was when I first came in. So there are a lot more things that are available now than were back in 1980, 8 when I started this stuff. But um, I never sought it out. I never wanted to ask for it, and I never embraced it. And I think I would have been, again, it's going to be cocky, but I would have been even better than I was if I would have used voice technology and um, my combination on the keyboard was in high school. I took typing, and my teacher got me a one-handed um, typing book to learn that my home keys were JH. Yeah, I'm reaching to the keyboard now. So okay, but JHGF rather than how people with two hands do it. And so if I had to do it over again, I would have been more proactive about seeking out those accommodations and changing my mind about that I wasn't the only one that was at needing accommodations. I need it for the keyboard. Maybe there's someone who needs it because they're a parent, right? And they need to take a kid to school, or they needed to be excused to take a kid to do what. I think if we open up our minds about what accommodations are and not use that word just relative to people with disabilities, but use it relative to the whole workforce, that be healthier for all of us, and would have been especially healthier for me back in the late 80s, early 90s, all the way up until I retired 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too of what if we as society change our mindset about accommodations. I think you made a great point. So I want to know, as an academic advisor, can you tell me a little bit about what you did in your everyday career?
Well, it depends on what position I was in. Academic advising toward the end was helping people with the nuts and bolts of putting together a class schedule, or figuring out what do I take when so that I can graduate on time, or how do I especially like that the community college working there, because students at community college are fitting school into the rest of their life. A lot of them are taking part-time classes because they're working, or because they're parents, or because they're PSEO students, or whatever it is. And so helping them put together a puzzle of how what they're doing now fits into their life today, but is also part of their bigger plan down the road, so they can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if that makes sense. And it was also connecting them with other resources in the communities. We worked a lot with connecting with single parent support resources, or job placement things, or working in the community with future employers to see what they were looking for in their potential employees, so that we at the school would avail the students to the skills that they would need when they actually were at the job site, something like that. Before that, I was a director of, well, when I was at Augsburg, we call it access services. Making sure that students were accountable for their disability, but they also had the opportunity to use accommodations. I did a lot of training with faculty and professors and teachers. Before I got into the school system, I worked with the United Way agency that advocated for people with learning disabilities and their parents. I would go around the nation doing workshops for classroom teachers on appropriate accommodations and how to have those accommodations in the classroom for people with disabilities. And even though I had physical disabilities, my background, my educational expertise was in learning disabilities and learning differences and doing diagnostic things to help you figure out what your academic strengths are, what your learning style is, and that kind of stuff.
That's awesome, and it sounds like you've done a lot of different stuff and a lot of things to help a lot of different people, and your impact is surely appreciated.
Thank you.
What has been your greatest accomplishment in your career?
When I first thought about it, I was blessed in 2002. I was voted the Educator of the Year by the National Association of Vocational Educators and Special Needs Providers. So I have a couple of awards in my house. But the thing I'm most proud of, I think, is that even though it's been almost 40 years since I started doing it, I have students that I first met back in the late 80s and early 90s that I still have contact with. And so that I can hear about their lives and their accomplishments, and every once in a while I'll see somebody on TV or read something about something in the paper that, I worked with that, he's an adult now, with that kid back in blah blah blah, and now he's working for ESPN, and now she's a mayor of her hometown, that kind of stuff. But to see the growth of the people that you work with and the fact that they stay in contact with you, that's the most gratifying part of of the work that I was able to do.
That's awesome, and in speaking with you, I think you've shown me that the impact that you've made on your community, and I'm so glad that others have seen that too, and that you've had the benefit of watching the people that you've helped achieve their goals and their ambitions and aspirations. What has been your greatest disappointment in your career?
I think we talked about it a little bit before. Now that I'm retired and have had time to kind of absorb my life, I guess, if that's the right way to say it, that I wish I would have been a little bit more comfortable in my own skin and willing to speak up about accommodations and not think of it as a weakness, but think of it as an efficiency, a way that I can be more efficient in my job. If I would have been more willing to come out and said, it will work best for me if we could do this, or instead of thinking about, can you help me? Can I do this instead? If I would have been more proactive and more like proud of this is what works rather than this is how we can address a weakness. If I would have presented it better, maybe I would have been more comfortable in seeking out accommodations than that. And if I could have changed my mindset about it's not shameful, it's a point of efficiency. It'd be like if I would have thought about it more holistically, if that made sense, that instead of accommodation, well, maybe think of it as we all work together for the greater good, okay? You're a parent and I'm not. So why don't you let me work late tonight so that you can go home and get your kid from school or whatever and then make it more of a trade-off rather than totally everybody working in silos. And I'm rambling a little bit, but I hope that the point comes across that accommodations, I wish there was a better way to say it, because it makes it sound like they're doing something for you. Yeah, maybe if I think about it more, I can think about a better way to present it. But we all, if we could all work together and talk about it collectively about what does each member of the team bring as a strength, and how can we use that to balance out other areas of need
Yeah.
at the workplace.
Yeah, I think that is, I think you make a great point, and I totally see what you're saying of making accommodations based on the needs of everyone. How do we, function as a team in the workplace? So, yeah, and I think that's a really good, understanding that we all have different needs to be able to function at work, whether you have a disability or not, is really important, because you may have a skill in one thing that you're super, super good at, and then there's somebody else who doesn't really have that skill or that ability as well. And so you can take that on and you can help them, and they can help you in the skills. So like you said, like kind of combining your skills, finding what works for you and everyone else as a team, and not making it so based in like favors, I think would help the workplace function more smoothly. So I have do you have parts of your career that are modified to accommodate your disability? And I know a little bit throughout this podcast we've talked about how you wish you used your accommodations more in your ability to find different resources that would make you more efficient and better to do your job. So however you would like to maybe respond to that question, or we can also just move on to the next question.
I don't have anything specifically because I was never comfortable enough thinking of it that way. I would, if I thought about specific things, I would have done more with technology, more voice activated typing and finally I wish I would have really dived into using the computer, using, you can tell by how difficult of a time we had just getting on this call that I am not Mr. Technology at all. And that is something I really should have embraced because it would have made my life a lot easier professionally, if it will.
Yeah, and I would say, as a person who does use accommodations, I would say like my best piece of advice when you're just starting to use accommodations is to try different things. Nobody says that you have to stick to one accommodation or two accommodations, or try different things, and you might need different things at different times in your life. So just be aware of that.
That's a great point. I think I was so worried about using something and thinking of it. You used a word that was really good about thinking of it as a favor, and it wasn't a favor. I sure thought about it as being efficient and being that accommodation really is a benefit to the workplace because it helps you get your job done better. And so I wish I would have had that mind. That I'm the poor crippled boy that they have to do this or do that. I'm being flippant or facetious when I use that word. I don't want anybody to think I was completely serious about that. But the whole mindset of they're doing something for me that they aren't doing for somebody else. I need to change. I wish I would have changed that for me, and if there's one thing I could do for the workplace now, if we could change that mindset that it's not about doing favors or adjusting for weakness, it's about making the workplace more efficient and making the team stronger than doing favors for one.
Yeah. And that's super important to keep in mind. My next question for you is, how do you ask for help in a professional manner, or how do now that you've had time to reflect, has that changed? Has the way that you ask for help changed?
Well, I'm much more comfortable doing it now than I ever was. But I think when I was trying to teach advocacy skills way back when, I always said to come to the table with possible solutions. And it would work best for me if we tried this instead of coming at it from a deficit and making it sound like, can you do me a favor? More like, it would work best for me if we could find a way, blah 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 blah. I'm good at talking. Can we do something that way rather than have me do a PowerPoint? I don't know. Or when you're trying to find a combination and you don't know what the solution is, if you can come at it as, okay, what is the goal of this? What are we trying to accomplish at the end? And then talk about how we get there. What is the goal? And then come with possible solutions. I know that asking for accommodations that way puts a little bit more pressure on the person asking, because they're almost required not only to advocate for themselves, but to come up with their own solutions. But I try to teach my students that that's also empowering, because you're coming to them with something that works for you, and that way you have a little bit more control of the narrative than if you say, well, I can't take a test this way. well, I can't type, so I don't want to do a report. The more you can own it and the more comfortable you are with it, the more successful I've been in getting the accommodations I need. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's even true in today's environment, but that was the mindset I tried to have.
Yeah, you definitely hit the nail right on the head, because I feel like even in my own schooling and my own, just going through life, to start with, I'm a very, driven person, and I usually come up with my own accommodations, and I'm presenting like, here's what's gonna work. How do we make it happen? So yeah, you're definitely correct in the fact that you know that works better, and I think it helps people who don't have a disability to be more open-minded to what people with disabilities can do versus what they can't. And I think too, like, although like it puts more pressure on us sometimes to, like, how do we figure out, how do we help ourselves be successful, it's when we figure it out and when it works, that is like that is an immensely better feeling than when somebody else has to figure it out for us. Now, there can be collaboration, like, hey, I think this might work, but I'm not sure how to implement it. You don't need to have all the steps. I think you just need to have the first step or the first idea. It doesn't have to work, but it shows that you're trying and you're committed to continue doing it.
And that you own who you are.
Yeah. What advice? You've given such incredible advice to everyone and to me on this podcast. What advice would you give to somebody with a disability who wants to pursue your career, or even just any, like, life lessons or life advice that you've learned throughout experiencing your life?
You just have to own who you are. I mean, maybe it's because my brother is an English major, but I've always said, I mean, the disability is definitely part of who I am. And to deny that it hasn't affected me, honest. But I always say, let the disability be an adjective, not a noun. I mean, the disability definitely describes me. It's part of me. It's not a big part of me. I mean, I don't think I would be who I am without having the disability. But to say it's all about me, or that it describes, that it affects every part of my being, isn't honest either. So, this sounds kind of cliche-y, if that's a word, but don't hide, don't pretend it doesn't exist. And I think a lot of times, to my detriment, that's what I try to do. I try to be the guy who's going to overcome this, and it doesn't really affect me, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not true. It is a part of me, but it's not all of me. It impacts me, but it doesn't completely define me. And if I can keep that mindset, that's been the most helpful for me. As I've aged, I'm not going to say mature because I don't think I am yet, but as I've aged, I think I've become more comfortable with that the disability is part of my life. As I was younger, I was trying to overcome it or ignore it, and that's not being honest either. I don't think.
Yeah, that's you bring up some really good points of being yourself, and I know at least for me too, like, you don't have to start off, it's going to help you when you stop, fighting who you you know who you want to be versus who you are. Like, you can definitely make goals, but I think sometimes we think of ourselves as all the things that we can't. And so, being proud of who you are and what you can do will bring you a lot farther in life, like you said, than, being negative about it.
Yep. Yep. It's part of us, but it's not all of us.
Correct. I think it's such a simple statement, but it's very impactful. Is there anything else that you would like to mention or talk about?
Well, I'm glad you're doing this. I wouldn't have had the courage or the wherewithal to do things like this, and so. And the fact that you're bringing out other perspectives, because there's no one right way. I mean, it's like any recipe for any good meal, anything you could, it takes a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and what tastes good to somebody might not taste good to somebody else. So I'm glad that you're looking at a broad spectrum of people and perspectives to put together the podcast.
Well, I appreciate your perspectives and your analogies. I love the cookbook analogy. Eric, you have shown us that you can totally do that, and so can others. Thank you for coming today and sharing your experience. This is your host, Alina Skinner, saying thank you to all of you for your time. Join us for the next podcast. I can totally do that. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast episode. If you did, please click the like button below, subscribe, and share. If you want more content from the I Can Totally Do That podcast, follow on all social media platforms.